Today we will be talking about the general election.
Yeah. So, like Manveer said, today's episode will mainly be a conversation about the general election because it's tomorrow. So, you got that to vote. You got basically tomorrow to vote. And tonight. Can you vote tonight still?
No. So apparently you can vote until 10 p.m, but all the polling stations are they're closed. They've been closed, so the only way you can vote is for online.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But yeah, we'll also be talking about key pledges from the main political parties and what's that going to look like for young people mainly. So the first thing that we've got coming up is national service. This is a hot topic that I've seen so many people talk about.
Yeah.
And I think it was so interesting to get your point of view, Manveer.
Yeah.
So at the moment, the policy is, or could be, the manifesto will introduce mandatory national service for young adults. This includes full-time military placement or community service roles 1 weekend per month. And the way that it will impact young people will be to instill a sense of national duty, discipline, and skills among young people. And the first participants will be due to start in September 2025. And this initiative will mainly affect 18 years old because that's when you're an adult. They kind of expect you to go do that. And Manveer, how do you feel about this, basically?
I feel like it is a very interesting pledge. What catches me and everyone else off guard is the fact that nobody expected it.
Yeah.
It's not the fact that it does seem extreme. There's some good parts to it. There's some very extreme parts to it. But the idea that you suddenly become 17 years old and then you have to do mandatory national service and plus your whole ambitions with your careers, plus your whole studies, plus everything else, it seems very extreme on the surface. But if we kind of talk about the fact that it can give you more discipline, it can give you more skills.
Yeah.
From that aspect, it seems, from what the Conservative Party have pledged, it seems very as a way to kind of build young people, build their skills, build their patriotism for their country. So it is something that it's got some parts to it. I don't think it's entirely extreme, but the way it's been presented, it seems very extreme by the plight. It's been presented in an extreme way.
Yeah.
And whilst some people, they have a lot of other stuff to do aside from mandatory service, if the Conservative Party get elected in, it'll be very interesting to see how they implement it.
Yeah, I feel like it's really radical though, because we went basically from 0 to 100. Just suddenly we started to see that, oh yeah, if you're 18, you can go to the military. And I feel like to a point you kind of wonder, why is it that suddenly you're basically forcing people to go to the military? Like, what happened? Why aren't young people signing up on their own accord? What's the issue? Instead of just taking young people and just, pushing them there. And I also feel like it's because our generation doesn't really care about it anymore, like fighting for the country and stuff.
There's not as much, I think, from what I've seen, there's not as much logic in like fighting wars because we've come through history to see that there's been many wars that have happened and we've seen the irreparable damage that wars have done. And some young people might not see the point of it, maybe because we take the way we live in a peaceful times, in a very granted way, but also the fact that some young people find it very irrelevant as well.
Yeah.
Like, why are we going to be fighting when we can just be taking care of our families, getting our jobs, getting our grades, and achieving things that any normal person would. And the idea, your suggestion as well, if I can remember now, was the fact that it just seems very radical. And for a young person, and from the last few years you can understand, there's not as much patriotism and that willingness to kind of like fight for the army and everything else, especially because we live in a very multicultural society in which everyone's got different views. That can also play a big part as well.
And also, I feel like, I mean, young people, our generation, like Generation Z, I would say that we're very unserious people. So that doesn't really sound like a good idea. But then again, you never know until you're in the battlefield.
Yeah, I mean, we do have, I think Generation Z has very serious opinions about things,
Yeah.
about matters. But obviously, because we're still living in our teenage years, our early 20s, we still are unserious about certain things that have never really impacted us.
Yeah.
So in that case, probably the reason why they might have wanted to pledge people to go to the army is probably because of the fact that they want young people to be serious about national duty.
Yeah.
Because in other countries and what I've seen, there's a lot of other countries that make national service, like South Korea, Egypt, and they make national service a big priority. If you've served in your army, within your society, you're seen as someone who's a bigger person, or someone bigger because you've been through those 2 or 3 years of service and taking your time out to serve your country. In that case, it just kind of becomes if it becomes a national thing, it becomes a thing of a little bit complex, but that everyone has to do it because some people aren't suited towards it, and that's where it becomes radical. There'll be some people that have always wanted to join the army, don't know how, don't know where, and everything else, but there'll be some people that absolutely reject the idea, and that's what makes the idea of being in the army radical.
Yeah. And also feels a bit out of touch, isn't it? Like, it's not something that is very common for everyone to be kind of signed off to duty. So I think that's maybe why it seems a bit radical, because we're not too used to it.
No, and it's out. It can be out of touch unless it will only be out of touch to kind of see how they approach this pledge, how they create this pledge, how they develop it as well. And if it's done in a way that it doesn't include everyone, in a way that they can, in a way that it kind of brings other people into it, if there's not enough inclusion or not enough understanding of young people, then it becomes very out of touch. If it's very catering towards young people, understanding that some young people have certain needs, others might not, then it becomes a thing in which you can integrate people. So yeah.
So one of the ways that this policy, I would say, could impact young people would be the sense of community or the sense of togetherness. How do you think this would play out? So do you think if young people were to go to the army, for example, would they be more united, or would we all be united as a nation?
I think in any environment that involves a lot of people, it's like, let's say you're in school now, and one thing I've learned being in a gap year is the fact that even if you have 10 or 20 people, maybe you don't get along with them, maybe you get along with them, if you do any activity with them, you're always going to form a natural bond, regardless of how you feel about them, how you feel about what they do to you, this and that. You're gonna form a natural bond, but maybe positive bond, maybe a negative bond, but there'll be a bond over something because you're doing the same activity together. In that fact, you can say that it can unite young people to do things together. If you want to say it in a way, it's a form of just like discipline, doing exercise. It's like when you're playing sports together with your friends or with other people, you kind of do an activity together, and then you build a relationship on that activity, or you build a relationship on that thing. Like, for example, I will only meet one of my friends from school because we came to the same school. After we leave school, maybe that relationship's not going to happen again. So simply, definitely, I think does form a small bit of community for as long as a young person is going to be enlisted a part of the national service.
I also feel like it creates a sense that we can relate more to one another. I say we, I mean, as a young person, not me myself, but like everyone will be able to kind of relate to one another because they'll be going through the same thing or situation kind of thing. So that could be that.
It could be that, definitely. So, yeah. In terms of participating, how would you feel in participating in the national service?
You know what? I can't remember. I think it was last month.
Yeah.
I went to this careers fair kind of thing,
Yeah.
and there was a stand for the army there,
Hmm.
and I got to try on the. I almost said the costume, but it's not a costume. The uniform.
Uniform.
So I got to try it on. First of all, it's very heavy, so I think that's a downfall. Because I really don't see myself running with that amount. And I wasn't wearing the full thing. I was literally just wearing the top gear kind of thing. I didn't have the boots on. I didn't have the guns, whatever. So, first of all, practically speaking, I feel like it'd be really hard. But then again, you get trained for that. And then I feel like the upside of it would be that you get a sense of belonging in the sense that you're doing something good for the community, for your country. But also there's that fear that, you might never come home. I don't know. Maybe it's just what I think of. But
I mean, yeah, there's certain levels to the British Army and certain ranks and
yeah,
regiments.
there is.
So when I was in high school, we had the Marine come into our high school. The Marine, basically, what they do is they take on secret missions, and they fight underwater, and they do very physical, like physically laboring stuff. It's absolutely like it's a
mental.
very big discipline.
Yeah.
We had a demonstration of some of the exercises that they do. I remember I was doing it. It's very tiring. There was one exercise in which we had to run 500 meters with a 30-kilo bag.
Okay.
And we were running from one part of, which was Lee Manor Park, all the way down to the basketball courts by our high school in Lee Manor. So we ran all the way there. It was very tiring. But then the entire time you had the guys who were part of the Marine, they're encouraging you. It's like, come on, we've got.
Yeah.
So they were just encouraging you the whole time. You got to keep running. You got to push yourself. This and that, and it was a very inspiring environment. But at the same time, it's very difficult.
Yeah, it seems very cool.
There's a very common saying with the Marines. This is the American Marines. They have a saying: before you want to get to heaven, you want to have to go through all hell.
Yeah.
And the amount of discipline it takes to be a part of that, and that could be another one of the reasons why young people are like, or the general public are kind of like, this is a very radical way of going about it.
Yeah.
Is because of the physical discipline it requires.
Yeah.
Maybe their approach to this and the way they develop this is going to be interestingly different and different in its own way, but we're going to have to see. And one of my friends, he actually was a part of RAF. I don't know what he exactly does, but he wants to go into becoming a pilot. And he was telling me that he spent a lot of months there. That's where he does his work right now. He says the first few weeks were very tiring.
Yeah.
It was very tiring. And then he had a regiment in which you had to wake up at 5 a.m. You had to run all these miles. You only had this food to eat. This is your ration, this and that. And it was a very physical and mental discipline about it. So for me, in my opinion, I would take the opportunity only for the basis that it builds my physical and mental discipline.
Yeah.
And it allows me to become more disciplined. And it creates a sense of a community at the same time.
Yeah.
But for most young people, it will feel very difficult.
Yeah.
So the approach and the development of how you'd want to present the national service, it has to be important and understanding, because the way you say things is gonna come across to people. Oh my God, why are we gonna send all young people to the national service?
Yeah.
When you're not taking into account certain things, but it's just a pledge for now. You never know what happens afterwards.
But I feel like personally, I'd like to do it because it seems like a challenge and a great challenge. Like when I say great, I mean massive challenge. In terms of physically and mentally as well. I feel like most of it is mental because you have to build resilience. There's this saying that goes, the body won't go where the mind doesn't. So you really have to have a strong mental stand on it, kind of thing.
Yeah, in that aspect, it can be an advantage if you
Yeah.
want to just build your discipline mentally and physically, being in the army, carrying out physical tasks, communication as well, because there's a lot of communication.
Yeah, as a team as
Yeah,
well.
but obviously the strict environment's going to be kind of difficult to handle. So, in terms of if you were to go to the army, how would you think it would affect your future plans?
I'm not sure how it would affect my future plans, but I feel like if it was something I liked a lot, I would definitely keep it in my life and do it a bit more. And if I didn't, then at least I would have, something to say, like, oh, yeah, I went to the army. I did it a bit more.
Yeah.
And then, see where that goes.
Yeah, I think another problem that it causes is the fact that if you're telling 17-year-olds that mandatory national service is you must go through national service, they might be thinking, well, I'm just doing my A levels now. I've just done my GCSEs. I'm not looking to go towards the army.
Yeah.
I'll go get my studies and I don't want to go behind it and everything else. So that can be a problem because some people have other things in mind. Even if they have like one of the news reports I was reading was that they wanted to keep 2 days in the weekend in which it's like you have your education 5 days a week and then 2 days in which you will do national service with national service. So in terms of that, even if people like I know a lot of people when I was in college, right? They were doing their A levels. On top of that, they were trying to do their driving lessons. On top of that, they're working part time. On top of that, they've got family, friends, commitments, and everything else. So it would be kind of difficult in trying to incorporate that to everyone else's schedule. I think the people who are most willing to go for it would go for it.
Yeah.
The people who are like, this has nothing to do with me because of X, Y, Z, they don't want to go for it, and that's where it can be a problem in someone's future. But at the same time, if that's something you're looking to go towards, it's a good way to start.
Yeah, it is a good way to start, but at the same time, I feel like if you don't have the passion for it, then it might be hard to carry out your job or your task, which can cause issues in the long run. But overall, how do you think your peers might react to this policy? Do you foresee any challenges or benefits for your generation or our generation as a whole?
In terms of my peers, I've got one peer that works in the army trying to become a pilot, like I previously mentioned. And all my other peers, in terms of my friends, I've never really talked to them about it, but just by understanding who they are, who they might be, some people have a very opinionated stance on the British Army.
Yeah.
Because of it for cultural people, because of what it used to stand for, being the British Empire. I mean, for some people, it is a sign of patriotism. Some people, it is a sign of what the British used to be like. And for others, they see it as a sign of discipline. You can build yourself as a very capable and disciplined person. So that's what the army brings to you as well. But in my family, I've had my grandparents be a part of the Indian Army, and they always stand for the fact that it does give you that discipline. It does give you that identity. Like if you handle a very big role, let's say if you're a very big role at any part of the army, you have a lot of status, and within the community, people might respect you for that. And that's the thing in terms of peers, in terms of society, in terms of community. It commands a lot of respect if you're disciplined, if you're capable, and even if you're just like a part of the army, because it seems like you're doing something.
Yeah.
So in terms of that, I think with my peers, some of them are like, they think that the idea of being in the army seems very radical because nobody's ever anticipated it. But if you've actually got a real passion to be a part of the army, work in the British Army, the Royal, the RAF, then it's a thing about in which you'll be able to command a lot of respect because you're doing something that's very disciplined and that will make you capable.
Yeah. I also feel like from what I've heard from other people in our generation, no one really wants to do it at all. I think it's just a case that, like we said before, we're very out of touch with it. It's not very common to just go to the army very
No.
casually.
No,
So
I think if you would want to influence the younger generation, you would have to foster a sense of patriotism, and you'd have to also foster a sense of not responsibility, but talk about the army and a form of inspiration. Because if you just say, like, end of the day, all right, you're 17 years old, you got to go to the army.
yeah,
It don't work like that. It always starts from young. If you give them inspiring stories about this, blah 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 that, and then the young generation will be like, okay, you know what? I have a real will to be a part of the army. But at the end of the day, it doesn't work like that. You've got to incorporate something or develop something within them for them to be in the army. You can't get people to be in the army. And in that aspect, that's why most young people are like, I don't want to be in the army. There's no point. Because there's no sense of purpose why I should be in the army. And after that, there's nothing else to go towards. The only reason I see is only the fact that you can become more disciplined and you're able to do things more efficiently because you have a very difficult regiment that you would have to follow if you're in the army. But otherwise, there's not really any purposes. With the multicultural society we live in, there's not really any will to be a part of the army.
Yeah, I really agree. No one really wants to do it. From what I've heard, anyways. I personally probably would, but yeah, no, I don't think young people want to do it. I think they just want to stay at home.
Stay at home.
But then again, that would
friends.
be an opportunity for us to develop more discipline as well.
Yeah,
It's
but
when you-
but then again, there's always different ways you can do that.
yeah, exactly.
You don't just excuse me. You don't just need to be a part of the army.
Yeah.
You can build your own discipline and everything else. So yeah, it's a good way, but it depends on the reason why you're there. If you're the reason why you're there, it's like basically you're forced to go to a after school club, but you don't want to be there in the first place. Whilst everyone else is there, they're having the funnest time of their life. Your parents are like, why are you at home? I want you to go to the after school club right there. And the whole time when you're playing football, you're just standing on the pitch and you're doing nothing. So yeah, in that aspect, that's what it's kind of like. Because the people that want to be there, they'll do their best. The people that don't, they're like, what's the point, man?
Yeah. But do you think people eventually protest against it?
Definitely. It's a very extreme idea.
Yeah.
It's basically you can't fit everyone into the same mold.
Yeah.
You can't fit everyone into the same mold. You can't take that mold out because being in the army is a sense of identity to a lot of people. Like one of my friends, he works in the army and he's got a lot of friends around the army and that's one of his identities. It's like some people aren't gonna like football, but I like football as well. But just because the other person doesn't like football, they don't have to like football.
Yeah.
If they feel that personally that I don't like football, they don't have to like it. So you can't force people into it. You've got to have that sense of passion of being in the army. Then it'll work out. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so we're going to move on to our second segment, which is going to be about education reforms. Do you want to tell us more about this?
So, education reform. So this reform targets both. So basically, the idea of the educational reform is that it wants to target more technical learning whilst having academical skills. So replacing less valuable university degrees with high quality apprenticeships. So the idea of this is basically that the Conservative Party are pledging to kind of scrap what they deem to be useless university degrees and provide more apprenticeships that can foster technical skills that you would need in jobs and in real life. So the way that it can impact young people, so what the Conservative Party are offering are 100,000 high quality apprenticeships The policy aims to provide practical skills and job readiness for young people. This could improve employment prospects and reduce the burden of student debt associated with traditional university degrees. So basically, the idea is that they feel like there's some university degrees they deem to be useless and that won't positively affect you in your careers or your future ambitions, and they'd rather more or less want there to be more apprenticeships. So what do you think about it, Ruth?
You know what? I feel like apprenticeships are so useful, and they're not. Well, they are talked about enough, but not many people are looking into it. And I feel like if you really look into it, you can see that it's so beneficial because at the end of the day, if you're lucky enough, you do an apprenticeship for a certain amount of time, and then at the end of it, you secure a job or a full time job wherever you did your apprenticeship, and then that's it. You're set. You don't have to go to uni. After uni, struggle to find a job because I know so many people who came out of uni with a full degree, with full on masters, and are still struggling to find the job that they want in their mastered field, which is so hard to see, especially after so many years being put and educating yourself. And also, I don't know why no one really talks about it, but really anything you want to learn, you can probably learn it on the internet. You don't have to go to uni for it or get a degree for it. You can just make it your hobby to become as knowledgeable as you want in that field. Sure, it might not land your job, but if you're really interested in that info or that knowledge, just learn it. You might not get a degree into it, but it's fun to do.
Yeah, if there's a will, there's a way.
Exactly. Yeah, especially nowadays that everything is literally on the internet. And you can find probably free, I would say university like courses, but pretty much free or anything.
The Open University as well.
Yeah. And then you can just learn it, do an apprenticeship or find another job, find a way. And most of the time you don't really need a degree to land a job nowadays. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's been an idea that's been raised before. I think before our time when university degrees weren't as expensive due to the cost of living crisis, due to the whole recession back in 2008. The idea was that you go to university, you study for 3 to 4 years, or you study even further to do postgraduate, and then you get that desired job, then you do this, do that. And obviously, the idea now is that what's the point of going to university now? Because I've got to pay my debt. I've got to pay off my student loans. I've worked 3 years. Some young people feel that I've worked 3 to 4 years on this degree, and then at the end of the day, even with people that have experience as well, like work experience and stuff like that, they don't get the job that they want to do because of what they've achieved. And the idea is that, one, you've got to think about why young people want to go to university. And secondly, you've also got to think about the outcome. At the end of the day, no matter how much fun you're going to have in your uni life and everything else, you've got to think about what it's going to lead to and how to be ready. And unfortunately, what we kind of find that is that some young people, they're done with university, but they don't know where to go afterwards. And they even apply for jobs, or even they might have a plan B and that might not work out. And with the apprenticeship, whilst it's a very good option on paper, it is very good because you're guaranteed a job, you're guaranteed income, you're not stuck in any sort of student debt or loan, depending on your financial circumstance. And having more apprenticeship based things allows for people to build those skills and build those abilities that they might need in their jobs. I know certain people that do apprenticeships within my age group, and some of them tell me it's in terms of the work life, it's very busy.
Yeah.
Like in university, you can take breaks and everything else. You can chill and have some, depending on if you do work part-time as well, that you can take that into account as well. But it's a very busy lifestyle. You don't have as much time to do things. Some university students are like, oh, well, at least I have a social life. You can also create a social life within an apprenticeship. It's just that you won't get as much time within apprenticeships. But it gets ready for your work life, for how you want to and it allows you to adjust yourself. Because if you're in a university environment and you go straight into the work environment, that can be very drastic. If you go apprenticeship and then you're slowly eased into the work environment with maybe you might have mentors around you who are here to support and help you and advise you on the role that you are doing, then it kind of helps. So in that way, I think it's better to go for apprenticeships. And with Conservative Party, they're looking at trying to bring more apprenticeships in and scrap the university degrees. I think the idea of scrapping the useless degrees is, in some ways, it's a little bit drastic, only because there are some people that are very passionate about subject.
Yeah.
Some people go to university for the fact that they want to expand their knowledge and horizon about a certain subject they're passionate about. And it's not really specific as to what do you deem to be the useless degrees. And that's another thing.
Yeah, I've also seen so many people that go to uni, do a whole degree, come out and find out that their passion wasn't where they studied, so they end up doing something completely different, and they end up with a useless degree. But I also feel like part of it is basically because there are not many jobs, especially for complicated degrees, I would say. I know people who have, big degrees or complicated degrees, biomed and stuff like that. And it's just collecting dust, honestly. That degree is just collecting dust. And I also feel like if there's so much gap between when you finish your degree and when you start working in your given field, you can forget some of the knowledge because you might have to go into other fields to earn money because you can't just
naturally that's how it works.
Naturally, you have to go into something else to earn money, and that knowledge might fade away. And how do you retrieve it? You have to study even more, or it might complicate yourself or complicate your route to finding the job that you actually want. So it becomes a bit complicated. But I feel like overall, the whole uni idea is dying away. People are slowly but surely going away from it.
I definitely agree with that. I think what you see is the same thing with the idea of housing prices and with everything else. Everything's changing constantly. You can't expect there to be the same pathway. At one era, at one point, at one generation, it worked. But in the next generation, you have to look at the fact that what is the outcome of these university degrees? What are they providing in actuality? And whilst I don't blame it entirely on the degrees. I think it's based on what young people are taught to do. The idea is that you get a degree, you're guaranteed a job. That's, from what I've seen, completely false. Because employers now, like we work at Attentive as well, with our managing director Montel works a lot in recruiting people for the police. They want to see if you have those technical skills that are needed for a job. Just like basic stuff like communication, being on time for everything else, and just making sure that you're a reliable person, and a whole bunch of skills that you will develop in a job and that you'll need. So university won't teach you those things. And with some people that they're doing complicated degrees, like you said, biomed, engineering, they will have to have work experience alongside the fact that they are studying for a degree to be able to go for the job that they want. Because let's say you're just someone that you studied for a degree. Just because you studied doesn't guarantee anything. But if you studied a degree, you've gone to a bunch of clubs, you kept yourself active, you've got a bunch of work experience, you've done just like part-time jobs and everything else, it goes a long way. And that's probably the reason why university seems like a waste of space. Why go to university when you can just build those skills by an apprenticeship? So it's becoming a theme of that. Going to universities, the idea of it is dying away, and there's more approach towards going for apprenticeships. But obviously, looking at the type of apprenticeship you want is another thing, and signing up and making your applications towards those things, it's quite difficult. But at the same time, if you get it, it's very rewarding. It's very busy compared to university, but apprenticeship seems like the way we are progressing.
You can also get a degree apprenticeship.
Degree apprenticeships as well.
If you really want a degree, you can get a job and a degree, and it's paid for.
So, we have been talking about the manifesto pledges for the general election. So the general election coming tomorrow on the 4th of July. We'll be finding out the results, who will be our Prime Minister, who will be our local MPs representing our constituencies. And for this show, we focus more upon the fact that the the pledges of the main conservative parties that they have in their manifestos, how that's going to affect young people, and how a young person would approach that. So on this segment of the show, we'll be talking about one of the Labour Party's pledges, who are probably the favourites, but we'll see tomorrow, obviously. So one of their pledges is that they want to lower the voting age to 16. So allowing 16-year-olds to vote. So in the pledge it says allowing 16-year-olds to vote will likely. So the impact of lowering the voting age is to allow 16-year-olds to vote. And so allowing the impact it will have is to increase political engagement among younger demographics. Young people would be able to have a more direct voice in elections, encouraging them to be more informed and active participants in the democratic process. So, Ruth, how do you feel about this idea of lowering the voting age?
I think to some regards it's great because you do have some younger people who are more into politics and who are very vocal and who want to take charge and who really want to be out there. But at the same time, I feel like the mindset that young people have as an overall, as in why they don't vote in general, doesn't really depend on age or who is allowed to vote and who's not. Um, because at the end of the day, whether you're 16, 18, you're still a very young person, and voting might not really affect you because you might still be living with your parents, you're just floating through life. So it doesn't really make a difference unless you have very, very vocal people, which we do. But other than that, I don't see how it's very different.
I think it gives a new opportunity for young people to kind of be like, okay, let's take the opportunity to vote. But at the same time, we have to look at the approach of how they've been brought up. Do they get taught political education in schools? Are they watching the news from time to time? What do they think of politics? All of these other views around what young people believe are very important to kind of be like, yeah, let's lower the voting age. I think it's a good idea if it comes with some incentive to teach young people about politics.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have to look at politics in the way that how is politics being taught? Are we giving one side of politics? Are we talking about the political system in the UK and how we make legislations and all this other stuff? That's another important thing to understand. And where are we learning from? Because there are going to be numerous people that might vote for a party for a reason that is not as concrete, but there are other people that have very concrete views. So that depends on the fact of how a young person's been brought up or how a young person has approached and seen politics in their last few years and the environment around them. So it's a very interesting one, but obviously there could be something behind it to kind of fuel that political engagement that the Labour Party pledge.
What would you say for those who might be thinking that 16-year-olds are not responsible enough to be voting or deciding the country's fate, essentially?
That's a good question. I would say that that's interesting actually, because on one side you would have the understanding that a lot of 16-year-olds, they don't have any idea of what politics are like. They haven't seen the way we lived and this and that. But one approach that I've come to an understanding to is that no matter where you are, where you're working, it's important to always gather everyone's opinion. Everybody's opinion is not going to be the opinion you want, regardless of how subjective you might find it, how objective it might be. You have to always incorporate everyone's views, because at the end of the day, even with 16-year-olds, you might find 30-year-olds that are very immature as well, and that they have an idea from what people are saying about responsibility. Or you might have even more senior people or people in their 20s. So obviously there's a fine line that they're still learning, they're still in the education system, they're not most of them aren't really earning a wage to be able to make the understanding. Oh, they haven't been through this. Why are they taking the responsibility to be able to vote 16 and 17-year-olds? But at that point, you have to also understand everyone's views are just as important. So that's what my response would be to that. Obviously, there's the indication that if they haven't been through education for long enough, how they're able to make a educated view. But at the same time, everyone's gone through different life process to have their own thought process, and that's just how life works.
Yeah. Personally, I think that there's a two-way thing to it. On the other hand, you have brilliant 16 years olds who are perfectly able to vote and make educated decisions and be happy with what they're doing. Whereas on the other hand, you have, I don't want to say the average 16-year-old, but the average 16-year-old.
They're not that serious about it.
They're not that serious about everything. You know, they're just 16. At the end of the day, you're just 16.
Yeah.
You're just figuring out what life is. You're so young that I don't think, as a 16 years old, myself personally, when I was 16, I didn't think about politics and how it would affect me and stuff like that. Even as an 18-year-old or 19-year-old, it's not that much into my head. So I just wonder how much an average 16-year-old would think about such things or politics, or how complicated it is to go into, especially if you're not into politics, to go into politics, learn about it just to make an educated vote. Could be overwhelming potentially to some 16 years old, but then again, like I said, we have some brilliant 16 years olds who would be able to make those right decisions for themselves.
It goes back to the discussion we had based on the army as well. Everyone's not going to be into it.
Yeah.
There are going to be certain people within the group that are going to be very passionate about it because that's something that they've always loved to do or love to be a part of. A lot of people love politics because it allows them the ability to have a say. And what I personally think is because we've kind of catered young people to being they're still educating themselves. They're not going to have a proper view on this, or they're not going to have a proper view on that. It's ultimately led young people to be like, our voice doesn't really matter as much because we feel like we don't know enough. But at the same time, if someone has a very different approach, some parts of it might work, some parts of it won't work, and that's just what happens within the experience of being a person who wants to say their views or how they feel. And that's where education comes in. If you give the opportunity to educate, then, or just like allow them to be educated on it, because I think political education, whilst it's one some young people won't like, it's an important source of understanding how politics works, either in a good way or a bad way. But having the basic education of understanding how legislations are made, how votes are given out, how MPs are elected, how the cabinet is, what the cabinet looks like, and everything else is a very important part. Where if you're young, if you're old, one thing I've come to realize: people who have lived in families that are very passionate about politics, they will know. It's like basically, if someone's passionate about football, they'll know the ins and outs of playing football, what team they support, and everything else. The same way, if someone is passionate about politics, they'll know like a lot of things about politics. Obviously, some of them might be very biased towards a certain party, but the idea is that they will know everything in and out. But if it's to politically educate young people, then it's a good initiative. If it's just out there to lower the voting age, then it's a little bit unstable, or there's an instability behind it.
Yeah, but that's the thing as well, though, because we have to remember that at 16, you're doing your GCSEs, so you have a lot on your plate first of all, and then you have to worry about educating yourself on politics and then making an educated decision based on that. And then everyone is on your head, as in you have to vote, because once you're at the voting age, you kind of have to vote. Well, you don't have to if you want to.
Yeah.
But everyone's telling you to vote, so there's that pressure on that as well. So to me, it's a bit of a tricky one, because it could be beneficial in a way that young people feel more included in making decisions for the country, but at the same time, it could also be very overwhelming for an average 16-year-old who is doing their GCSEs, worrying about their A levels coming up. What sixth form or college are they going to go to, and then adding on to that political knowledge that they have to know if they want to vote. Yeah.
I think it's the way. Is at the end of the day with these pledges, you will come to realize that it doesn't matter what the pledge they're going to give. The pledge is like the front cover of the book.
Yeah.
You've only seen the front cover of the book, but you haven't read the pages afterwards. What's going to come afterwards? What's actually written in the pledge? What's the legislation they want to make out of it?
Yeah.
What does the majority have to say? Because you got to also look at if you're making a legislation or you're making a pledge. Some of it might be legislations, some of it might be immediate, and so on. But it's the way that the political parties develop these pledges and they stay onto them, because sometimes there might be XYZ circumstance and the political party that are in charge, they're going to be like, oh wait, we can't do this anymore, let's go to the next one. So with the voting, I think it's important that the Labour Party have an approach to educating. Some people, like you said, they're like, I've got everything else going on. What's the point of I don't have time for this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's more of a thing of which it gives the opportunity for other young people that don't know about politics but maybe want to dabble into it a bit. It gives them the opportunity to be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to get this opportunity to educate myself on politics and understanding the political system. Obviously, you can still do that with your A-levels and everything else.
Yeah,
that's another thing.
I was going to say, you can still do that and not have to vote. So you can still educate yourself and not have to vote. But like you said, you never know how the pledge would go. They might completely go off track with it. Or on the other hand, they might choose to reinforce it even more. They might make some classes mandatory on politics so that people know how to vote or when to vote. Go both ways, but yeah, that is just one of the pledges that are coming up.
Yeah, so I also think that if there are like youth programs, I know there's youth politics. I don't really know much of it. Obviously, one of our last guests, Kwame, was a part of youth politics.
Yeah.
He's a very passionate individual.
Yeah.
And he really he's very passionate about politics and is really into it. I think for the passionate people that are very passionate about politics, they would really want this. They would want young people to kind of invest themselves, because at the end of the day, we are the next generation. The people in their 40s or 30s, the 50s or 60s, they're not going to live the life that we are going to live, because the changes that the parliaments are going to make, the government is going to make, and the people in power are going to make is going to ultimately affect our lives, because we're going to be living through most of it. And that is another reason as to why the voting age is a good reason to be lowered. But the only thing it comes back to is just the fact that, are young people going to be politically educated?
Yeah.
And how are you going to incorporate that with schedules and everything else, blah, blah, blah. And it's the same with every one of these pledges. Every one of the pledges are like, they're good ideas. They're very good initiatives to bring about change. Some of them not so good, because they might be extreme and radical in their own way. But it's about how each of the political party carries through them. And we'll see tomorrow, obviously, who will be the next political party, who will be our MPs and everything else. And then we'll kind of see, how are they going to develop it? Are they going to develop it? Are they just going to throw it out the window and be like, no, because of this, we're not going to do that anymore for a good or bad reason, which we've seen previously in British politics. But it's going to be very interesting. And all of these pledges, we didn't read out all of the pledges because there's a lot of parties that are running for the parliament. But we just read out the pledges that will affect young people if one of those political parties come into power.
Yeah.
So overall, how do you feel about the discussion?
I think it was great, honestly. I feel like as young people, we don't really get to have many of these discussions. And I know that there are so many young people out there who are so bright and so passionate about this, but they don't have the platform to have these conversations. You can easily see it online where people do give their opinions. So it was interesting to have this, especially with you, Manveer, because it was a different perspective.
Hopefully mine wasn't too extreme.
No, it wasn't. But yeah, how do you feel about the conversation we just had?
I felt very good about it. I felt good discussing with you because you also have a
Mm,
different perception towards mine. Obviously,
mm.
not like very far away left or right and
Yeah.
all this other stuff. But I think it was good to have the discussion about politics and the pledges and understanding them because even myself, I I don't I'm obviously not educated to the point where I'm very passionate about politics.
Mm,
I read the news every day, but learning about it and learning another perspective, going through the manifestos and understanding each political party and what they stand for,
mm.
I think is important, and everyone should learn it if they want to. Obviously, you
Yeah.
can't enforce political education,
Yeah.
but I think it's important to know because you've got to know who's making the legislations for your countries, who's standing in power, what do they bring to the table, and that's why I think it's a very important thing, especially for young people, because we're going to be impacted the most, because
Yeah.
we're going to be living in their world in the next few elections as well, and that's just what it comes down to the
Yeah.
whole time.
And it's really interesting to kind of dabble into politics every now and then. Not fully, I wouldn't consider myself to be a fully political person, but overall, just having the basics or knowing the basics of how the country is going, what direction is going, because obviously, if you're a citizen, it's going to affect you one way or another, whether that's in a positive way or a negative way. So you might as well be informed to know what you're going to do, what your next moves are going to be. And on
Yeah,
that note,
I will
vote
say my
tomorrow as
yeah.
well.
Vote tomorrow and make sure your voice is heard, especially if you're a young person. It's
Mm-hmm.
important to put your view out there, and it's important to speak out. Thank you very much for tonight's Youthology show. Thank you very much, Ruth.
Thank you.
And we'll be back in the next 2 weeks from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. on a Wednesday. We have been Youthology Radio brought to you by Attentive Social Enterprise, and good evening.